Hey everyone, JSTCool here, and welcome to another Skinny Man Dev Blog video. Now, since the last episode in this series, I have released a couple versions. So, first of all was the big version that I was working on in the past episodes, and then I released a supplemental patch because I screwed up something with how the resolution settings were saved. I also took that time to update the text boxes in the level creator to be of the newer, better type. Anyhow, ordinarily I would be starting with the game open here to show that it is in fact a thing, but I cannot do that right now as I am in the middle of a relatively destructive rewrite here, or refactor should I say, of systems that should make the system hopefully more modular in the future, but currently a lot of things level creator related are currently broken, so I'm gonna go and get fixing those. So while I do that, enjoy this time lapse of me going and doing stuff in the code. There's a fan in the background, deal with it. Anyhow, I've finally gotten this game to a state where it can launch, and theoretically levels should be completely fine and load, but the level creators doesn't work at all because I've changed how things get placed down. So first try, let's try loading a level. That doesn't look like it worked too well. Alright, I found out what the problem was and fixed it. It turns out that treating the type string of the level components, or stage components, as identifiers that I've implemented in the last minor update when I did all the multiplayer stuff. Though they are not exactly alike. Turns out that I did a lot of different capitalizations, and some of the types have spaces in them. So I've done stuff to fix that, so everything now loads correctly. But anyhow, actually, let me explain what I've generally done here. So, as I mentioned in a previous episode, I've implemented this serial registry object technique here, which allowed multiplayer to be a bit more, hopefully better and dynamic. The basic way that the serial registry worked is I passed into this register function an ID identifier, which is a new object I made, and also a reference to a constructor of the various object. That way, when data from the network comes in, I can just feed the appropriate data into these constructors, which is determined completely at runtime without me having to hard code instructors anywhere. Instead, it's just parameter in a function here, and then it'll just all work at runtime. So what I've done is I've tried to implement the same system, or a similar system, but for stage components. And there we have the stage component registry. Now, stage components have a lot more than one way to be constructed. Obviously, every stage component is also an object that can be serialized. So we're going to have the serial constructor, which is the same one as this, and in fact I've just made it so this registry passes along that to the serial registry for convenience. But there's also a couple other ways that stage components can be created. There is the JSON constructor for when the object is being loaded from a file. A JSON object is passed in and it uses that to construct itself. And then there is the placement constructor, which is what is used when you actually are in the level creator placing down objects, because that's just simply passing in all the various X, Y parameters and all that. However, there are two different kind of categories of stage components that you can have. Ones that are placed with a drag of the mouse and one that are placed with a simple click of the mouse. So I've had to split the different constructors into two various forms. The generic placement constructors and the drag placement constructors. Add to that the fact that the way we pass in constructors here, that each constructor can only have one argument. So I've had to create specific classes to handle passing in all the different arguments that these different types need. Of course, there's more arguments necessary for the drag version. But also, because no matter what parameters are required for the constructor, the resulting object that contains that constructor is always of the type function, and these generic assignments here only exist at compile time, so at runtime, Java has no knowledge of these at runtime, so even though we have one of these as a general placement constructor and the other one as a drag placement constructor, Java sees both of these as just function. So it will by default think that both these registers or register methods are exactly the same. Specifically, when you're registering a draggable object, I just added a random integer at the end just to make them different, although I think I have a way to eliminate that later. Because you see, I thought of a bunch of things when going through this that's going to be necessary, because on top of this just changing the way that objects are loaded and placed into the world, most of which I've implemented, but only kind of half implemented, I've also thought about how this is going to a little bit work on the level creator actual interface side of things. So in addition to just having all those constructors being stored and able to be accessed, I've also thought of how I'm going to be interacting with this stuff in the toolbox. So instead of just having everything being hard-coded in the toolbox, this button is here and this is what it does, everything is going to be generalized in the toolbox, and we're just going to have collections that get iterated over to render and interact with most of the buttons that are actually corresponding to stage components. Of course, other tools like blueprints or moving the player, that stuff's still going to have to be hard-coded, but any actual placeable individual component is going to be procedurally generated. However, I still do need a couple things for that. Namely that I need the icon to go on the button, the description text when you hover over it, and also when you're allowed to actually use and click this button, whether it's allowed in 2D or 3D levels, in 2D or 3D mode, that sort of thing. However, I have since realized that there's a little bit of something that I did forget when I was doing this, which is the placement preview. So when you're actually going to place an object on the stage, it'll generally preview the object at your mouse position, here's what you're doing, or when you're clicking and dragging from a draggable, here's what's going to be placed. Very useful, but I haven't generalized that yet, so I've had to leave all the existing preview stuff up. I'll get to that later, but for now, we're going to move to the toolbox window to configure all this stuff to be on the fly generated. Alright, I've gotten a start on messing with the toolbox here, and as you can see, it looks a lot different than if you're familiar with the level creator's toolbox currently. I've removed all the stage components. First of all, they are completely, currently commented out because obviously we're moving to the new system. But more importantly, what I've done is I put all the tools right next to each other in the line, and they're also all visible right now. Like, they shouldn't all be visible. I'm in a 2D stage right now, so none of this 3D stuff here should actually be visible, but I've decided to forego those conditions for now because those are very much cluttered and also a very big source of complication and confusion and spaghetti code in the current system, I guess you could say. So I'm working on putting them all just here right now, and their positions are going to be dynamically figured out. But along with that, I have to actually make the various icons here relative to the button position instead of relative to, absolute position, because currently I believe the move player and delete buttons, these are actually absolute position. It just so happens they're in the exact same spot as they were before, but grid mode right next to them is, the lines for that are being rendered underneath something else, and I don't know which button it's under, probably either select or the play pause button, which is also here now, because save and exit to overview, these buttons are common across both the stage editor and the logic editor. And I think select is too, so I have to move that up. But they therefore have to be first so that no matter which one we're on, the common buttons are in the same place, and I don't have to worry about skipping a number because something else already has that number later down the line in a different editor. So yeah, this is where I'm at, and gonna make all these icons relative to their buttons location, and then we can get actually procedurally generating all the other icons and buttons. Alright, I got all the buttons rendering correctly, I believe. I can't remember if it was the case before, but the size of the grid mode is in the corner. I should center that on the button. I should, but I'm too lazy to. Anyhow, I also did mention in the last clip, I left the goon button in place. That's not going to change for now. It will be dynamic later. But that's always, it's an entity, so that's going to be after all the placeables. And later, probably very end of this episode, we'll get to actually making entities properly registered like everything else. All the buttons are, once again, here again, and obviously we can actually tell what they are based off their, the hover text here, but obviously they don't have any icons because I haven't actually put the icon rendering for each button in. They would technically be rendering icons if I had put them in. It should all theoretically be working. Now, I haven't done anything for clicking yet. That is something I haven't even touched yet. I basically haven't gutted the code for the clicking of any of this stuff yet either. We'll get to that later. And also, I haven't changed which ones are allowed in which dimensions. Again, doing that later, but that should be relatively simple because I have variables set up to govern all that. So anyhow, yeah, let's get some icons. Alright, I've gotten all the buttons rendering properly with their correct icon in its correct position. And I also figured out that the goon was actually one location over, as apparently I had either just copied something and not noticed, or or I'd just taken the spot of something in 3D mode that wouldn't have been seen at the same time with that because they were, or the goon is not currently available in 3D mode because I haven't made 3D models or AI for it, for that matter. Maybe I'll do that someday, but not right now. Anyhow, now that the buttons are all here rendered properly, I gotta make them, actually appear correctly from the given mode, because currently this is just a 2D stage, so none of this 3D stuff, so these things shouldn't be here, the 3D buttons shouldn't be here. I think that's it for 2D, but then obviously in 3D we have other things that shouldn't be here, like the finish line, that's not a 3D thing, sounds are not a 3D thing, obviously that's not a 3D thing, so that's what's next. The buttons are now selectively appearing. As you can see, everything is working correctly. Hover text as well as, just the buttons just not generally rendering. This is, of course, for a 2D stage right now. I can quickly switch over to, oh crap, OBS is up on the other monitor. 3D stage. There we go. Alright, 3D stage. And so this is what it looks like for a 3D stage when 3D mode is off. Again, as you can see, various things are missing here. And their hover text isn't rendering. We can switch then into 3D mode and things change once again. The portal goes away, these couple things go away, but everything else is remaining put for now. Currently, not much is going. Hang on a second. That's not supposed to be rendering like that. What's going on here? I guess I'll have to look into that later. What the heck? Anyhow, let's get making the rest of those buttons functional. Click functionality has actually been implemented for all of the various tools and other, buttons on the stage properly so that they only activate in the correct stages and such. Now that I got this functioning, let's test and see if the actual new placement mechanics works here. But also, mind you, I haven't implemented previews yet, so I won't be able to see what I'm placing before I place it. I just gotta trust that I'm doing it. So nothing happened. Dang it. Or at least draggables aren't working. Let's try something I can just generally place, like a checkpoint. Nothing works! Yay! I gotta go figure this out now. Actually, I'm just gonna ignore this problem for now and move on to the previews, because that sounds like more fun. Alright, I got the previews for the general placeables working. Look, woo, checkpoint flag on my mouse pointer. And if I turned on grid mode here, woo, checkpoint flag at the grid position that, it's supposed to be. Oh. Alright, I got all the clicking and dragging working. It turns out that my problem was, or the previewing and placement actually. The problem was that I had this stuff here hard-coded with the various types for the ground and slopes and stuff. Now this is all generalized with the registry and testing if stuff is in fact draggable, and in fact it should work regardless of what we're dragging. Clearly it didn't. Alright, I've gotten the slope placement working once again. That was a strange bug I had to track down there. For some reason, I wasn't able to delete these things in their bug state as well. So that's crazy. But anyhow, previews for placement in both 2D and 3D have been finished. So I think I can officially call these rewrites to the toolbox and tool handling systems completed. I just gotta delete a bunch of legacy code now, and we can move on. Alright, I've gotten the 2D blueprint editor hopefully fully sorted out, and this all should just work. And also, as a side note here, this revision that I've done has added more things to the 2D blueprint, like the button and the sign. There was very little available to the 2D blueprint. I don't even think death planes were available. So, cool that we got those things now. We could just, give it a bit of a test. That looks like that works. Let's get a triangle here. Worked. A death plane. Perfect. I'm not going to save this as usual. Okay, we got a couple signs. Those work, and... Dun, dun, dun. Okay, so I've just decided to remove the button from the blueprint. That was the simplest solution to that problem. Anyhow, likewise here in the 3D blueprint, I have gotten everything implemented. Now, when we go into 3D, the proper things appear and disappear, which is mostly just this button and the movement buttons. So anyway, there's that, and we can see that placement of stuff doesn't work. I can't help but feel that it's not at all my fault that didn't work right, or not at all the fault of the new stuff that wasn't working there. Hang on. What in the ever-loving fuck is going on here? Okay, so it looks like there's problems with 2D placement here. I'm relatively certain that did not exist in the 2D blueprint editor, although I will go back and check. That also do be a problem. They're not registering that they're supposed to be 3D placed. Anyhow, 3D, ooh, that's real bad. Alright, I have fixed, hopefully, the placement problems that we were experiencing here. As you can see, that does, well, the problem with this was that I was using I was setting dx to dz instead of dz. That's a problem. And then, in terms of just general things getting placed, there's multiple constructors that all take numbers, and specifically to make the coins possible, an integer can be passed in for the coin index, in 2D when you only have an X and a Y, and I was for some reason passing depth in as an integer, so it was using that constructor instead of the one that has 3 floats for the 3D object. Anyhow, that's all handled now. Now that we've finished doing everything that we need to do with the stage components, it's time to move on to updating how we deal with all the logic components in a very similar way to what we just did in this very long process with the stage components. Alright, I've got the game to a bootable, loadable state now with all the modifications to logic components and how they're registered. However, that doesn't mean that everything is actually fully functional yet, as you can see. I'm having the issue, I have to deal with the problem again with the identifiers that they put in place for all these objects not being the same as what their type was. So yeah, I'm gonna go through and modify everything to hopefully be unique, but still backwards compatible. I've managed to get the level able to load, which means hopefully all the logic components loaded correctly. Let's take a look at the logic board here. Okay. It's all looking pretty good here. Hopefully all this is working fine. I don't really know. I don't think the logic itself will probably not work, but, you know, we'll test it later. Now we gotta get over... now we gotta get over to work on the toolboxes. This all needs to be revamped, as this isn't gonna work properly right now. I mean, especially, delete's not even there anymore. Where the heck is delete right here? I've re-implemented all the buttons here, and you might notice that they're all basically blank apart from the sound because, well, as it currently stands, I've never had icons for any of these. It was all just text, and I don't offer that as an option for actually putting stuff on buttons anymore. You get an icon, not like in-button text. So the next thing we're going to do, assuming this works, is that I'm going to spend some time making the proper icons for the AND gates, the constant on signal, whatever that's going to be, the delay. But before that, we do actually have to make sure that this sort of stuff doesn't crash when we place stuff down. So let's do that. Oh yeah, also things that are only half height are now a bit offset in their placement. I should go into their constructors and make sure that they're going to not. Alright, cool. That'll work. Let's get some icons going then. Icons! I have done them all, and they're actually pretty decent. For the most part, I am happy with them. Some of them I had a tough time figuring out what to do with, like the read variable, read 3D mode, and set variable, set 3D mode. I had no idea what I was going to do for that, because, like, how do you make an icon for that? Well, obviously I did something here. 3D with an arrow pointing out of it to indicate that you're reading it. An X to represent a variable with an arrow pointing out of it to represent you're reading it. And then likewise the input is, or the setting version is arrow pointing into it to indicate that you're writing it or setting it. Everything else for the most part is pretty self-explanatory. The logic icons here for the various gates that they represent, those turned out pretty well. Delay, I tried to make an hourglass. Keyword didn't try there. Constant on signal, this one was another one. Like, what do I do for that? So I just tried to indicate that it's one of these connection dots that is activated, because here's the exact example. Here's the constant on signal, and the output is just on. So there's that. Obviously the play sound, this is the only one that had a picture beforehand, because, well, I already had that icon from elsewhere in the level creator, so why not reuse it here? Other ones that exist here, so we have the pulse, that's supposed to be a digital, like, what a pulse looks like on an oscilloscope. Random, I had, well, ideally I would have done, like, a dice, but, like, trying to, like, do a 3D thing, I mean, I can make a 3D renderer, but I don't want to do that for a button, because that could be very weird and messy. Anyhow, and then trying to just do the perspective transform manually in squish circles didn't sound like fun, so one side of a dice, specifically 5, maybe I'll reduce that to 2 at some point, because it's technically a binary random instead of just number random, but whatever. Moving on, we have the icon for setting visibility. Supposed to kind of look like it's disappearing, but, you know, I guess that's a bit subjective. And then finally, we have the setting the offsets. So for these, I did arrows that are supposed to indicate on which axis that it's being moved in. So like, and also corresponding with the colors that we use in like the 3D, at least in 3D with like the movement and scaling for each axis. So for X, we have the red, that's side to side. Y is green, that's up and down, and then Z, that's blue, in and out. But obviously, this is 2 dimensions, not 3 dimensions. So I had to get a little bit funky with that, so that arrow looks like it's tilted into a 3rd dimension that you still have to look to. Now that was actually a bit complex, because I was like going into GIMP and like doing transformation, or using the perspective transform tool to like transform something, then copying that matrix down and throwing a bunch of vertices into it to try to get something. In the end, it worked out okay. But yeah, that's the icons. So much more readable like this, where you don't actually have to like individually read buttons to figure out what they are. Pictograms, definitely the way to go. But now I gotta put them in an order that makes sense, as this order makes honestly no sense. Like, we got like, I think this is alphabetical this is like an alphabetical order. Let's put it in a logical order. This is laid out in a much more sensible way. Now, specifically the way I'm trying to lay it out is, trying to logically do this. So, to start off with, all the logic gates are together instead of just being randomly thrown around. And we got NAND or XOR, NAND nor XNOR here. All pretty logical there. And then I try to, with those, I try to group signal control components together. So that's why we then have the random. Actually, really, random doesn't make sense there. It's just the icon looks okay. I didn't think about that till now, but whatever. We'll say that random is that. Delay and pulse together like this. Because generally they, I guess apart from random, dang, that's, whatever. It doesn't look out of place. That's the biggest thing. Those kind of are used to control the flow of the signal through your logic board, and then we can start getting into the various inputs and outputs. So the constant on signal to start with, then obviously you can see the rest of them here. Okay, so the final thing I have to do here is actually do this whole registration thing for entities. Now, entities are a little bit weird, as I did actually try to do a registry type thing when I initially implemented them. And it's basically what you can see in front of you here, with this comment about its replacement impending, which is about to happen here. But as you can see, I just tried to make a single hash map, which wasn't very well thought out because I didn't know how to properly implement things. I do know how to properly implement things now, and now this is going to be its own class, as with all the other registries. Thankfully, though, entities should be a lot quicker and easier because there is one entity that we really care about. So, alright, the game is loading, but as you may expect, levels aren't right now. I gotta do a bunch of work, including actually a bunch of stuff to the entity AI processes themselves to make them work again, because I've decided to get rid of a couple things. So, alright, I've gotten level loading again. That was, as usual, pretty simple to make everything nice and flexible in the level loading systems. Next up is, of course, getting the toolbox ready to actually dynamically handle entities being registered and such, which should also be pretty simple. Alright, button implementation, it's not that hard. I'm basically just copy-pasting things already. But it's not all that easy either because, I'm kinda getting one of these right now. Alright, I've gotten it all working. As you can see, I can now place them down correctly, and I believe everything should work. Oh, well, I guess they died immediately on hitting the death plane, but they move back and forth as they're supposed to. Everything is working just fine, which also means that I think it's about time to end off this episode, because it's been taking me a bit of a while to do this, and this was obviously a major refactor of a lot of systems under the hood, but will make functionally no difference to people just generally using the game. I mean, yes, maybe if you're building a level, everything's maybe in a different order, and hey, you got a couple icons or something like that, but no one's actually going to experience any issues with this. But there's a good reason for this, besides just tech debt being dealt with. There's something that I'm planning in the future which should hopefully be made much easier by this, but regardless of that, I'm going to have to say, reminder, the stuff seen in this video is currently in development. It's not currently out for release, but if you did want to check out the current version of the game, a link to that will be in the description. And besides that, thank you all for watching. Like, subscribe to all this stuff, comment down below, tell me what you thought about this, and I'll see you next time.